Oh, sorry.
Oh, don't worry about it. Hey, what you got there?
Oh, this? It's just a game for my son. What?
Well, don't you think that these games are bad for developing minds?
Well, why would you say that?
Well, first off, people, especially kids, get so addicted to their games that they can't find it within themselves to simply put the game down. It's to the point where it completely disrupts their day-to-day lives, which isn't good for children. All these games filled with such horrible violence that can be so influential to a child in ways you can't understand because you're an adult. One kid even jumped off a building with a garbage bag after playing a Superman game.
Well, nearly everything you just mentioned is almost directly related to how the kid is brought up. I can see that my son is mature enough to handle these games, so I let him play them, especially because games help kids develop certain skills in a variety of ways. Once my son started playing mystery games, his problem solving in school was amazing.
Well, actually, despite the so-called common knowledge that video games are bad for you, it turns out that most scientific studies show the opposite. Many studies that show that video games cause children or people to become violent have been proven wrong simply because of scientific error. An article from Procon.org states, studies claiming a causal link between video game violence and real-life violence are flawed. Many studies fail to control for factors that contribute to children becoming violent, such as family history and mental health. Plus, most studies do not follow children over long periods of time. Video game experiments often have people playing a game for as little as 10 minutes, which is not representative of how games are played in real life. The CDC stated that since the large-scale rise of gaming in about 1995, the crime rate for males of the primary gaming audience, which is 10 to 24-year-olds, has dropped by almost 50%. Furthermore, the Procon.org article, it states that sales of violent video games have significantly increased while violent juvenile crime rates have significantly decreased. Just to give you an idea of how violent some of these games are, take a look at this footage from Mortal Kombat 10.
Brutality. Jason wins.
The link between video games and aggressive behavior is really non-existent. The link between video games and aggressive thoughts is more robust. But again, that's not the same thing. Dr. Ferguson offered a number of suggestions in his paper to strengthen future research in the area. Then he conducted such a study. He randomized 103 young adults to play no video game, a non-violent video game, a violent video game where they played the good guy, and a violent video game where they played the bad guy. Then they all had to do a frustration test. In other words, they had to engage in some activity which would make it more likely that they would get frustrated and perhaps aggressive. And his study showed no link between playing the games and aggression. But those kids who had a history of playing violent video games in real life had fewer hostile feelings and decreased depression during the frustration test. They had fewer hostile feelings and less depression.
The U.S. Supreme Court ruled that violent video games do not cause youth to act aggressively. In Brown v. Entertainment Merchants Association, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled 7-2 that California could not ban the sale of violent video games to minors. Justice Antonin Scalia wrote in the majority opinion that studies claiming to show connection between violent video games and harmful effects on children have been rejected by every court to consider them, and with good reason. They do not prove that violent video games cause minors to act aggressively. Furthermore, with the Supreme Court case, it stated that, like the protected books, plays, and movies that preceded them, video games communicate ideas, and even social messages, through many familiar literary devices such as characters, dialogue, plot, and music, and through features distinctive to the medium such as the player's interaction with the virtual world. That suffices to confer with the First Amendment protection. What this basically means is that even though video games are different because of a user-willed interaction, they are still an art medium that is protected by the First Amendment.
One study in particular had participants play Super Mario 64 for 30 minutes a day over 2 months. Afterwards, the brains of these participants saw an increase of gray matter in areas associated with memory, strategic planning, and fine motor skills of the hands compared to those who had not played. These are particularly encouraging results for mental disorders which cause these brain regions to shrink, using video games as a therapy. Surprisingly, action games can also increase attention to detail in individuals. Take a look at the following words on screen and yell out what color the word is as fast as you can. So, green, blue, orange. Okay, now try a bit faster without me. As we continue, it becomes more difficult because there is a conflict between the word itself and its color. Chances are, if you play more than 5 to 10 hours of action games a week, you're able to solve these problems much more quickly. This is because your brain is actually more efficient in the regions associated with attention. Very practiced action gamers were 58% better at perceiving fine differences in contrast, which is important as this is one of the first things to diminish with age. Even in the elderly, improved memory and focus is seen. More importantly, specially designed brain-teasing video games have been shown to slow the aging process of the brain by up to 7 years. This is because they are cognitively complex and require mental energy. Think you're able to keep track of what's in front of your eyes? Keep an eye on the blue circle here. Eventually, it will turn yellow like all the others. I will then point to a circle and you tell me if it was originally blue. If you knew this ball wasn't blue, then you're a functioning human being. But let's make it harder. Staring at the middle of the screen can help to keep track of the blue circles. Was this circle originally blue? If you said no, you'd be right. One more time, but with 5 blue circles. Was this one originally blue? Yep, it was. It turns out the average person can track about 3 to 4 objects, while practiced action gamers can track around 6 to 7.
Based upon these findings, it's safe to say that video games really don't hurt people or kids, but rather help them. As video games are an art form, it is completely legal for anyone to create anything, as long as there is some kind of rating associated with it to guide people to the right material. As far as video game usage goes, it's good to keep it in moderation.